Oh, I should have put a Zoom shirt on. But you'll figure it out. I'm Patrick Kelly. I'm a distinguished architect here at Zoom. I've been here for over 2 years now, if you can believe that. That's the fastest 2 years that I've ever had in my life. And prior to working for Zoom, I worked for a small software company you might have heard of named Microsoft. So I've been in the UCaaS space for a long time. To tell you how long it was, I first supported. I was back on the network support escalation engineer back in the day. I supported LCS 2003. Right? Did you even know there was such a thing? Then I supported LCS 2005 and 2005 SP1, and then OCS, and then Lynx, and then Skype, and then Teams. I've literally deployed, supported, sold every single iteration of the Microsoft UCaaS platform there ever has been. Really, to be live meeting. I even did live meeting for a while, if you can believe that. You don't even know what that is, probably. It dates me. I guess that's why my hair is gray at this point. And with all that 14 years of working in the Microsoft industry, how do we parlay that into Zoom knowledge? What does that mean to us as sellers, as engineers, as maybe even CSMs or TAMs, account executives? This is where we need to have this conversation. The conversation of Microsoft Teams and Zoom. Because let's be honest, 99.86% of every enterprise you walk into is going to be a Microsoft shop. I totally made that number up. I have no idea what the real percentage is. I'm sure Gartner knows, but I don't. I'm just guessing. It just seems like every time I walk into some place, whether it's enterprise, upmarket, or SMB, or any vertical, they're a Microsoft shop. Like, rarely do I walk in and talk to them. They're like, "Oh yeah, we're all Red Hat, Linux, and Google." Right? That just doesn't happen in the space that we're working in. I'm sure it's out there. We just don't deal with it a lot. Hence why I put 99.86%. I don't know what so 0.14% of everybody's the Linux shop in Google. I really don't know. That's not the point. The point is we need to have this discussion about Microsoft Teams and Zoom, because Microsoft's a vast software as a service company, right? They're a predominant player in the cloud industry with Azure. They're a prominent player in the infrastructure. They're a prominent player in OS. They're a prominent player in Productivity Suite and File Repository, SharePoint, OneDrive. They're a prominent player in identity with Active Directory and security, with advanced threat protection and Defender and all Intune and everything you can think of. They're in their hands somewhere. CRMs with Dynamics. But we're only playing in one space here. We're playing in the UCaaS space. We don't play in all those other spaces as of yet, right? As of yet, we play in the UCaaS space solely. And that's where we compete with Microsoft and Microsoft Teams. And now we have to be well armed to have this discussion with our customers. And how do we have that discussion? Well, watching this video is probably one of the ways we can have that discussion. So we'll be armed to have that discussion of, hey, I have Teams. What do I need Zoom for? Teams is free. Why do I need Zoom? Teams does all this stuff. Why do I need Zoom? Well, you better be able to answer that question. You're going to get asked that question a lot with your career here at Zoom, because Microsoft's threat and competition is not going anywhere. It's going to increase exponentially, hopefully, and that's okay, right? Competition drives innovation. So let's just dive in, right? Let's make this recording as short as possible. No, you know me, I probably won't make it as short as possible, but you have a fast forward button. How about that? You have a times 2 button or a times 4 button maybe to speed me up. So let's dive right in. What are some of the questions you're going to get in the field when you're competing against Microsoft and Teams? One of the main ones you're going to get are, what are some of the reasons customers choose Zoom and Teams together for their UCaaS strategy? Utopia would be if there was one application that could do everything perfectly. right? That as a CIO, a CTO, an IT director, a BDM, you want one application that you can deploy, one application that you could buy, one application that you could support, one application that you could train on, one application that you could admin and operate. That would be amazing. And that one application can do everything perfectly, everything perfectly. We don't live in that world yet. Zoom's working on it. So is Microsoft, but each of us probably have some level of gaps in our UCaaS story. And certainly we're looking to close those, and I'll go over them a little bit. But let's look at where we have a delineation between Teams and Zoom today. Teams is an amazing collaboration tool. Don't disrespect that. It's a very, very strong collaboration tool. Slack came on board, 3, 4, 5 years ago, and Microsoft only had Skype, and Skype didn't fit the bill for what users were wanting. Users were wanting persistent chat. Skype had persistent chat, by the way, on-prem, but that's not the point. It didn't have it online. Users were wanting instant messaging. Users were wanting collaboration, real-time collaboration from their vehicle, from their UCaaS application. Skype wasn't that. Skype was instant messaging, and Skype was meetings and phone calls. None of them very good, right? That's why Teams was developed. A full cloud solution for the future of UCaaS is what Microsoft said. So they developed Teams to compete with Slack originally, to compete with the instant messaging and the collaboration, channels, Teams, all the stuff that Teams does very, very well today. Even so, it's a single pane of glass into everything Office 365. And can it do a lot of the stuff that Zoom can do? Yes. Can it do it as good as Zoom? No. That's the whole point, is that you're going to have customers that want a premier service for their UCaaS strategy. And it's okay to feel like you're a premier service. We are a premier service. We are on top of Teams. I won't get into a licensing discussion, but you can't just buy Teams from an enterprise perspective. You can a little bit from a consumer. You can't just buy Teams from an enterprise perspective. You have to buy a bundle, a Microsoft bundle, an E3 most likely, or an E5. Sometimes even F3 or E1, depending on how you're going to name it that day. But E3, E5 is pretty much where you're going to see your enterprises sit. A3, A5, G3, G5, depending on what vertical you're in. And how do we get these to work together? That's the story we need to talk about, is that when you go into a Microsoft customer, why do I need Zoom? That's the question. How do we use Zoom and Teams together? Well, here's like the top 10 things that I've seen over the last 2 years. This is not a Gartner level study. This is not Wayne House or Forrester. This is Patrick Kelly talking to some of the things that I've seen in the industry when it comes to Teams and Zoom. Some of the sales calls that I've been on, which are thousands over the last 2 years. What are customers saying? What are customers wanting? What are their pain points? Why are users that have Teams using Zoom? That's really where we're getting to. The number one reason is external meetings. I see this every day, all day long. Let's walk it through two different workflows. The first workflow is simple. Every information worker, knowledge worker in pretty much every enterprise that's a Microsoft shop is going to have Teams. And they're using Teams for collaboration, right? They're using Teams to chat and send files. So Susie in HR is chatting with Bob in accounting using Teams. Here's the first workflow. Susie's tired of typing and says, "Hey, Bob, can we meet?" Here's two different workflows. I keep saying that to emphasize the point. If Susie's in Teams, chatting with Bob in Teams, and they want to have a quick meeting, she's got two choices. One, she can literally just hit the meeting button, the audio or the video button in Teams, one click, and boom, she's talking to Bob or videoing Bob in a meeting, sharing her screen. It's pretty simple. The second workflow could be Susie in HR could go to Zoom as an application, invite Bob to a meeting. Bob can accept the meeting outside of Teams, and they can have a Zoom meeting. Those are two distinctly different workflows. Which one do you think the user is going to do? It's the simplest one. It's the most effective one. It's the most efficient one. It's the easiest one. Yeah, Susie in HR is going to just hit the video button inside of Teams. We're talking without Zoom app involved. It's a different discussion. So Susie in HR is going to have a one-click workflow with Bob in accounting. And that's fine. That's the workflow I would do too as a customer. Makes perfect sense. That's not why Zoom's in the picture here. Because how much revenue did that call from Susie in HR to Bob in accounting generate for the company? Big fat zero. In fact, it could probably cost you money because you're paying them both a salary, right? It didn't generate any revenue. Sure, work was done, but it didn't generate revenue. Let's go to the second major workflow. Let's go to Steve in sales. Steve in sales are CSMs or TAMs or support engineers who are now having external meetings with vendors, prospects, customers, partners. Those are all revenue generating meetings and calls. Why is that important? Gartner says the first 8 to 10 minutes of every meeting is a waste of time. Why? You've been on meetings. People are dialing in late. People are dialing in early. People can't get their mic to work. People can't figure out how to turn video on. People don't know which link they click. People are confused about how to turn off their speakers and if they have an external phone. Like, it's just a mess. The chaos, right? The first 5 to 10 minutes of every meeting is chaos. When you're Steve in sales, you can't waste 10 minutes every meeting. Those are revenue generating minutes that you're wasting, not only on one call, but on 20 a day, times 5 times a week, times 52 weeks a year. All that time is being wasted because you're not using the tool that's best for the job. And guess what tool that is? That's Zoom. And I'm not just saying it. Well, I am just saying it. But 500 million people said it. Why? Because IT didn't push out Zoom to everybody in the world during the pandemic. What happened? Shadow IT happened. And users went and got the tool that worked best for them. And that's where we're at today in 2022. No longer are we in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. Yes, I'm dating myself because I grew up in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, and I was in IT during that time. And what did IT do back in the day? Draconian measures, right? Draconian measures of, we're going to push one application out. You get this application for the next 3 years, whether you like it or not. So good luck to you. Happy doing whatever. There's no other choice. Today, 65% of users in the workforce are millennials and younger. Guess who grew up with a computer in their hands? Not my generation. But millennials and younger grew up with iPhones and iPads and Androids and Chromebooks and MacBooks and laptops and desktops. Everywhere they went, Xbox, PlayStations, they had a choice for what app they wanted to use for the job that they needed to do. Now create that into the enterprise, and guess what? Those millennials that have the same and younger are going to have the same mentality. They're going to choose what app works best for them, whether IT pushed it out or not. Inconsequential. Shadow IT is huge and prevalent. That's why a lot of the times you'll walk into an enterprise or a company and say, hey, they're like, hey, do you have Zoom? They're like, no, we don't have Zoom. And we full well know they have Zoom everywhere because their domain suffix has been logged into thousands of times. So we're like, I know you don't think you have Zoom, but you have Zoom. And why do you have Zoom when you're a full Team shop or a full WebEx shop or a full Ring Central shop? It's because users want the tool that works best for them. And Steve in sales, Sally in HR, CSMs, TAMs, AEs, salespeople are going to choose the tool that works best for them, most effectively, most collaboratively. Boom, that's Zoom. External meetings, number one reason. Typically, users want Zoom and Teams together. Can Teams do external meetings? We know the answer is yes. Can it do it as well as Zoom? We all know the answer is no. And I always implore people, like, go try to do a Teams meeting with somebody that doesn't have Teams. And then count the mouse clicks it takes for that user to join a Teams meeting. It's way more than Zoom. I don't know the exact number. I actually did a video. I don't think it was like 12. I can't remember. The point is, it's not one click. Point is, Zoom is quicker, easier, faster. And not because I said so, but maybe Steve in sales says so. right? Sally as a CSM said so. Tom as a TAM said so. Your grandmother said so. Billy in second grade said so. It's easier and faster and quicker. External meetings, number one reason. Large meetings. In the Microsoft world, large meetings used to be 250 or more or less. So 250 was the max. 250 was the max. Why? Because Microsoft couldn't do it very well. Anything above that, you're like, nah, it's a big meeting. We can't really do that really well. It doesn't really look good. It doesn't really work well. It doesn't really scale well. The quality's not very good. So 250 is it. Anything larger than 250, you have to do a broadcast with Skype broadcast or our live events or something that's not real time. Then Zoom came along and you're like, you know what? We view large meetings as up to 1,000. And all of a sudden Microsoft's like, whoa, let's raise ours to 300. Way different than 250. Same kind of response. And then Microsoft's like, oh gosh, we probably better bump it to 1,000 people, I guess, because Zoom's 1,000. We better be 1,000. The problem is they can't do it as well as we can. They're not architected to do it like we are. From their data centers to their servers to their application, from the client perspective, it can't handle a workload like Zoom can. And again, as an AE or as a SE or as a CSM or as a TAM or any of those levels that you're talking to customers, and your double-edged sword, your Jedi mind trick, your double-edged lightsaber is POCs. Implore your users, your customers, to just try it. That's the great thing about Zoom, is we're not afraid of a challenge. We'll go against head-to-head against everybody in almost every modality. So employ your users to try external meetings with Teams. Employ your users to try large meetings with Teams versus Zoom. Have a 1,000-person Teams meeting, and you tell me the experience from a quality perspective and an experience perspective from both the attendees and the participants and the presenters, and then have it in Zoom. And you tell me which one works better. I know the answer. You will too after you do it. Zoom Phone. Talk about a game changer. We'll dive into this a little bit more later. But the game changer of Zoom Phone really changes the way UCaaS is deployed. Why? Because we view Zoom Phone, I'll dig into this a little bit later, as an extension of UCaaS, not just a plugin. Microsoft developed Teams for a collaboration tool. Then they took old technology, old Skype technology in video and audio and in phone and just slapped it onto Teams. It wasn't developed brand new. Zoom Phone was developed brand new from the cloud perspective up after we'd perfected meetings and video, because video is the hardest part of the UCaaS strategy, right? Or is phone. That's the problem, is that if you don't have a holistic viewpoint of these things and how they synergistically work together, you've lost the UCaaS picture, and Zoom has not. Zoom Phone is an extension of that UCaaS story. And I'll dive into Zoom Phone a little bit differently in the next question, actually the third question. But Zoom Phone's an important part of that story and strategy. Webinars. Zoom has been doing this for a number of years. Webinars, right? The ability to have a real-time communication meeting post 1,000 people, right? Real-time collaboration, real-time meetings using the same client, the same interface, the same user experience. Webinars has been around for a number of years in the Zoom world. Full transparency, Microsoft now does have webinars, right? They came up with it last year, I believe. They said, hey, Zoom has this. We probably better get this. Again, use your lightsaber. Use the POC. Have a 5,000 person webinar in Teams. Have a 5,000 person webinar in Zoom. And you tell me which one is better. From registration all the way to the end. Waiting rooms, breakout rooms, upgrading a participant to a presenter. Do all those things in the Zoom world. You can't do them in the Teams world. It's a loaded competition. And for good reason. We'll kick it every time. Operational readiness. Back when I was a kid, we called this disaster recovery or business continuity, right? It's a fancy word. Today, we call it operational readiness. So what does that mean? My first IT job, second IT job, was working for ESPN in Bristol, Connecticut. And my boss came in, Jesse Myers, love that guy. Came in, it's like, hey, you need to build an email server. It was Exchange 5.5 back in the day. He's like, you need to build an email server. So I built one. No idea how to build one, but I built one anyway. And there was no YouTube back in the day that showed me how to do all this. I just figured it out. And then he's like, hey, we need some high availability. So he's like, build 2. So I'm like, I built 2 and put them in a data center. He's like, hey, now we need disaster recovery. I'm like, what does that mean? He's like, what if the building goes down in a hurricane or a fire? What are we going to do then? And so I'm like, I guess we build 2 more servers in the other building, right? So now we have 4 servers doing the job of 1 because we needed high availability and disaster recovery. Today, we don't do that. I mean, you can, right? You can do it with Exchange if you really wanted to have it on-prem, but we don't do that anymore. From a UCaaS perspective, what's operational readiness to a customer? What if they are a Teams shop? What if they are a Teams shop and they use Teams for collaboration? Do you remember when Teams went down for 13 hours last year? Straight 13 hours. What was your operational readiness plan then as a Teams user, as a Teams shop? You call Microsoft like, hey, Mr. Microsoft, Teams is down. They're like, oh, yeah, we know. You're the 10 millionth caller. We're going to get right on that. Right? 13 hours later, it was up. What was your operational readiness plan? What if you had Zoom and Teams was down? What if you had Zoom as operational readiness, as disaster recovery, as business continuity? What wouldn't have been affected? That's right. None of your meetings would have been affected. None of your phone calls would have been affected. None of your webinars and breakout rooms and digital signage, none of that would have been affected because you, as a CIO, were smart enough to know what operational readiness was, and you planned accordingly. Breakout rooms, much like webinars, something we've been doing for a number of years. It's a powerful platform. Guess who has it now? Microsoft, full transparency, does have breakout rooms now, right? They did come up with that last year again. Another feature that Zoom has that Microsoft's like, well, that's pretty cool. We probably better put that in our stack. And guess what? They did. And guess what doesn't work nearly as well as ours? Double-edged sword, remember? Use your Jedi mind tricks. Use your lightsaber. POC. Do a POC in breakout rooms between the 2 platforms. Hands down, we win every time. Breakout rooms. Zoom apps. This is the platform changer, everyone. This is the ecosystem where the UCaaS is going. Even Eric says this sometimes in his calls, is that Zoom apps is going to change the way we view UCaaS. And through different levels of Zoom apps, right? The Zoom app marketplace, where we have like over 1,500, last time I heard, 1,500 different applications that you can plug into the Zoom client itself. Full transparency, Microsoft has this too. They're, I think, at 1,000, 1,100 last time I looked. And then we have in-meeting apps, right? A whole different world than Zoom apps from a marketplace. Now we have in-meeting apps that you can work inside of the meeting without having to launch a separate application, to launch a separate window share. It's part of the meeting itself. Full transparency again, Microsoft Teams does have in-meeting apps. It's not nearly as verbose as ours. And do we have work to do in this space? 100% we do. To make it more efficient and make it quicker and operate it and admin it a little bit better than we do today. But that's the great thing about innovation, right? We launch stuff. It's not fully baked right from the get-go. We launch it and then we continue working on it. Microsoft typically doesn't do that. They usually launch something and then they let it go and then they go on to something else. We launch it in sometimes its infancy, like maybe even call center. That's not fully baked out with all the functions we know we're going to have in the next year or two. And that's okay. Zoom apps, game changer. Are we going back to Vegas for 5 days in a row, staying out late, getting up early? Remember those days? We might get there again someday. That's true. But the point is, until we get there, we still need conferences. We still need virtual events. We still need Zoomtopia's multi-day events that are virtual from the same platform as your UCaaS solution. Zoom Events is the game changer here. No one else does this. Teams doesn't do this. But Zoom does. Big difference. Golly, can I talk enough about innovation? Innovation is really the cornerstone of probably one of our biggest attributes. We are a dynamic innovator in this space. I was actually talking to a CIO the other day. Well, actually, he was a CEO. He actually he said, I'm a distinguished CEO. When I told him I was a distinguished architect, he got one up on me, I guess, on that one. He said the greatest thing to ever happen to Microsoft Teams was Zoom. Competition drives innovation. I told you that earlier. And that's the point, is that it's okay. We are nimble, small ship still compared to Microsoft, right? They are Titanic. They move slowly. But innovation is the core part of our heritage almost, right? We've been here 10 years. Innovation's been the cornerstone of how we've really shined. And we continue to do that. I just was at a Zoom IQ meeting prior to this, like analytics and artificial intelligence built into our sailing cycles. Like it's call center, intercom, like all these cool features that we're coming out with all the time. That's really exciting to work at a company that puts so much drive and innovation into their product. And we will continue to do so. And it's okay if Microsoft copies us. We will always be ahead here. It's flattering, right? User adoption, shadow IT. I talked about shadow IT a little bit earlier, users wanting choice. I was talking to another CEO of a large stock trading company. I'll let you figure it out. I don't know if I can say it. But he's like, the greatest thing about Zoom is that I can give it to a user and then I never hear from them again. Right? Is that it's so easy and quick to pick up on how to use this tool. And do we have lots of different functions and modalities inside the tool? Yes. The great thing about it is it's not drowning like Teams is. Teams has a ton of stuff, but almost so much so that it's unusable to most users. A lot of noises going on. I guess I got a meeting in 15 minutes. User adoption is one of the biggest reasons to use Zoom. Users will figure it out on their own how to use it. Vast amounts of user training are not required. Users can pick up on it because it's the way we architected it, the way we designed the client to be ease of use. And it doesn't matter if you're on a Zoom room, an iPad, a Mac, a Windows OS, an Android phone, or iPhone. The UX looks the exact same on all of those platforms. Teams can't say the same thing. Zoom Rooms, talk about a game changer. As we go from completely remote to someday, as we start going into hybrid, to maybe someday going full-time on-prem. That'll probably never happen, but you never know. Zoom Rooms wasn't a big part of the first year of the pandemic, right? No one was in the office. But as we've started to get into hybrid, and we started to showcase that, hey, those $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 conferencing rooms that you've deployed that you haven't used for a year are a waste of money. And they don't do nearly the cool stuff that Zoom Rooms does for a fraction of the cost. You can deploy probably a full Zoom room for around $5,000 probably. And it would be kick ass. Deployment's easy. Training's easy. Functions, modalities, greater than Microsoft Teams rooms. This is another reason why we see Zoom working alongside of Teams. Not only from the client, but also to the conferencing room. Big difference there. Big difference. Okay. That is why you would see Zoom and Teams working together, right? What are some of the reasons why you would have Teams and Zoom in the same organization? That's why. That is certainly why. All right. Cost is always a primary factor, Patrick. What are some of the points we can bring up when talking to customers? Cost is always a primary factor. It's not the only factor, but it's certainly one of the primary ones. Usability, adoption, management, operations, deployment, migrating, support, like all those are costs, right? You're thinking about the cost of the piece of paper in front of you. You're thinking about day zero costs. And what's the difference? Most people are like, hey, what's the license cost? That's what we call day zero. What is the cost of the license? Teams is free, right? That's what you hear. Teams is free. No, it's not. Teams is not free. Teams is part of a bundle. It's a great, ingenious way to hide the cost of something, right? You're not doing a la carte in the Microsoft world. You get everything or nothing. You don't get to say, hey, I just want Teams and Word, right? I want that. Just like you want to go to DirecTV and you're like, hey, I want just ESPN and ABC. They're like, that doesn't work that way. We have 100 channels right here, or 200 or 400. The cost of ESPN gets lost. The cost of NBC gets lost in the 100 channel shuffle. Same thing with bundling. That's why Microsoft does it. That's why Cisco does it, to hide the cost. So the cost of the license is kind of harsh to understand, because in your Microsoft world, you're buying an E3 or an E5 license. What's the cost of Teams? You have no idea. It's not broken down like that. You buy the full bundle. So Teams is not free. Just like saying, hey, I bought 100 channels of DirecTV, ESPN's free. You're like, no, it's not. You just paid for it for your 100 channels. It's built into that cost. Same with Teams. Teams is not free. It's the cost of that license. Let's look at it a little bit more objectively. Say you're a Microsoft shop, right? And you have E5. You have E5. You have the Mac Daddy of all licenses. And I don't use Teams. Is it cheaper? No. Do I have the choice to not include Teams in E5? No. So Teams, honestly, the cost of Teams is inconsequential in this discussion, because regardless if you use Teams or not, you still need the E3 or E5. You still need Active Directory for identity and security and authentication. You still need SharePoint for repository. You still need OneDrive for personal files. You still need Exchange and Outlook and Word and PowerPoint and Excel. You still need all those tools regardless if you use Teams. So don't go down this rabbit hole too far when it comes to the cost of Teams versus the cost of Zoom. It's blurry because Microsoft makes it that way. But regardless, the cost of the Zoom license is day zero cost. The day zero costs. It's a premier service. It's above and beyond what they own today. And why? I just gave you 10 reasons why. What's the day one cost? That's the cost of the deployment. Okay, great. I bought Teams. I bought my E5. Who's deploying it? You might have a Microsoft staff on site, the Office 365 staff of admins. Great. Guess what? Teams is actually now part of the Office suite of products. Honestly, it doesn't cost a lot to deploy. You're deploying Office anyway. It's built into the cost. What I'm saying of cost of deployment is all the advanced functionality beyond just the application itself. Deploying Teams is really pretty simple. You're deploying Office. You're doing that every day. So deployment of Teams as an application is not what I'm talking about here. Cost of deployment of everything else. Just because I deploy Teams doesn't mean it automatically has phone system. Doesn't mean it automatically has dial tone. Doesn't mean it automatically has audio conferencing. Doesn't mean it's already set up for call queues and advanced auto attendance and call routing and call policies and phone numbers normalization and emergency calling. Those, by the way, you probably don't have on site. You probably don't have a Teams voice admin expert on staff. You might have many Office 365 ones. That's a different animal than the cost of a UCaaS deployment. Don't get those intertwined. They are different. People say, oh, I already have Office 365 admins. Yeah, great. And you can deploy Office 365 all day long. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about advanced video, advanced audio, networking, packet loss, RTT, firewalls. All that is beyond the scope of what an Office 365 admin can do. Networking guys are involved. Cisco guys are involved. Firewall guys, Juniper guys, Palo Alto guys, phone guys. This part of the deployment is complicated and takes a lot of effort, and you probably don't have the expertise on staff, even if you are a Microsoft shop. You're probably going to have to call somebody, an SI, a solutions integrator in the Microsoft world. Why? Because Microsoft's set up for solutions integrators. The whole reason Microsoft's a partner ecosystem. Why? Because Microsoft doesn't want to do deployments. Can they? Yes, they can. Microsoft has a consulting services that I worked in for 9 years, by the way. The point is they don't want to. That's not a gigantic revenue generator for them. It is for partners, the Converge Ones, the Cardinal Systems, the modalities, the Unify Squares. All those guys are solutions integrators when it comes to Teams and Teams Voice. Why? Because it's hard. It's very, very hard. That's the point, is that the average Office 365 admin is not going to know how to deploy voice. It's above and beyond just Teams. I think you get the point. The cost of the deployment compared to Teams versus Zoom, exponentially greater. Do we have our own professional services? Yes, we do. The point is you could probably deploy a lot of the Zoom phone stuff without having a solutions integrator. You could probably do it yourself. What did I say was my double-edged sword? My lightsaber? POC. Deploy Zoom voice, deploy Teams voice, tell me which one's easier. Boom. That's your secret weapon. Cost of operations. So, day 0, you bought it. Day 1, you deployed it. Day 2, who's operating it? Who's administering it? Who's managing it? Who's supporting it? Who's training on it? Day 2 costs are bigger and badder than the day 1 costs, which are bigger and badder than day 0 costs. These all add up. These are your overall cost of your UCaaS strategy that you chose as a CIO, CTO. So don't just look at the piece of paper in front of you. Challenge as a seller the cost of your UCaaS strategy. It's day 0, day 1, day 2 combined. And this isn't a one-time cost, everyone. This is an every year cost. This is when we see the Metrigy study come into play, one of our resources we have in this office hours that we're doing here. Cost of operations. Metrigy said cost of operations of Teams is 64% greater every year than Zoom. Every year, this cost. I always tell a customer, like, hey, do a POC with Microsoft and do a POC with Zoom, and then call support. Call Microsoft support and say you have a problem with your phone. Tell me the SLA on that getting fixed. Call Zoom and tell them you have something wrong with your phone. Give me the SLA on that fix. Gigantic difference. Huge difference here. All right. Why would a customer choose Zoom Phone over Teams phone system? Remember what I talked about earlier? The number one thing that Zoom sees phone versus Microsoft sees phone? Extension of UCaaS. We developed Zoom Phone because we had done so well with video and audio and meetings that all our customers said, hey, you know what I would love phones to be as easy as meetings and audio in the Zoom world. So we did. And we rode that architecture on top of our video architecture on our same client. QoS. Co-located data centers. Shared data centers. All this stuff we do underneath the hood makes phone the highest quality, high level modalities, right? High level of what's the fidelity is the word I'm looking for. Compare it to Microsoft Phone, and not just simple dial tone. That's not what I'm talking about. Everyone can do simple calling stuff. What I'm talking about is an extension of UCaaS. I'll give you an example. And Microsoft can do this style too, but here's just an example. You're on your phone. You're driving down to work. You're actually on a Zoom phone call with your buddy Peter. You walk into the office. You're like, hey, Peter, I want to escalate this to a meeting. What do? I literally hit the switch button, and I escalate that simple phone call into an effective Zoom meeting on the fly dynamically. That's UCaaS, extension of phone. That's an example of that. What about the other functions of a phone? And again, I'm not talking about calling. We don't call better than Teams. Teams doesn't call better than Ring Central. Everyone has 10 digits and a star and a pound. Like everyone dials the phone the same way. Everyone receives a phone call the same way. Everyone can put somebody on hold. Everyone can transfer somebody. Everyone has voicemail. Those are table stakes. If like you don't have the minimum of that, you're not even in the phone business. So let's take that and just table it. Everyone can do that. Let's take stuff above and beyond that. I just gave you an example, right? An extension of UCAS, the switch button. How about Power Pack? Microsoft doesn't have that. How about Power Pack? How about a simple one that just came out, right? How about Intercom? Like that's the coolest feature I've seen in a long time. Again, it's not one golden shiny object. They're like, oh my gosh, Zoom Phone has this one golden thing. It's 100,000 little things. Maybe that's an exaggeration. It's 1,000 little things that make Zoom Phone better than Teams. Above, just from a functionality perspective, let's go to what we talked about in day 1 and day 2 of the previous question. Adminning and operating Zoom Phone is much easier than Teams. You don't believe me? Just try it. Have your IT company try it. Remember that 13 hours of downtime last year? And I'm not throwing rocks in glass houses. It certainly can happen to Zoom as well, but it didn't. That's the point. It didn't. Our uptime is vastly superior than Microsoft's uptime. Full disclosure, Microsoft just announced they have 4 nines in the SLA for Teams phone system. The problem is they also have 3 9 SLA for Teams. Right? So how does the Teams application have 3 nines, but the phone part has 4 nines? It's tricky. If you haven't read the SLA and the new Microsoft SLA 4 nines, read it. It's full of small little words and lots of different asterisks and lots of different language on how they meet that 4 nines. Uptime. Zoom's architected for this. We will beat Microsoft in uptime every year, no doubt. I have full confidence we will. And you tell a customer that. Challenge again, that challenge mentality of a CIO, CTO. Hey, do you want all your eggs in one basket? So when Teams goes down, and I'm not talking just Teams, maybe phone, maybe Active Directory, maybe Azure, maybe SharePoint, maybe Exchange. Teams has 0 data in it. Did you know that? There's 0 data in Teams. Teams is just a window to everything else from that perspective. Let's see if I have a meeting real quick. I think I do. Teams is just a window to everything else. So uptime can be affected by every single one of those modalities. That's kind of the point. Almost done, I promise. Quality. Quality is a paramount part of the Zoom strategy, the Zoom roadmap, the Zoom ecosystem, the Zoom platform. The Wayne House study showcases this exponentially. On a perfect network, what works perfectly? Everything, right? But we don't live in a perfect network. We live in a remote network. We live in a hybrid network. We live in a mobile network. Whether the pandemic or not, we live in a mobile network in the world today. Not everyone's in the office today. On the road, at home, on the internet, at the airport, at a customer site, you're talking about 10, 30, 50, 70% packet loss. What works best then? I think you already know the answer. You've seen the Wayne House study, and I wouldn't have brought it up. Zoom works the best on every single level of network conflict, above and beyond Teams, WebEx, and RingCentral and 8x8. Zoom is number 1 in all these categories. So you want the best quality of experience? You're going to pick Zoom for phone. You're going to pick Zoom for rooms. You're going to pick Zoom for meetings and audio and webinars. We are superior in every single category here. Don't believe me? Try it. Finally, then I will shut it down, I promise. PSTN philosophy is vastly different in the Zoom world than it is in the Microsoft world. What does that even mean, Patrick? It means we want to be that vendor that provides your UCaaS stack wholly and holistically to the end user. We do this by providing PSTN coverage in 48 countries, I believe, today, and counting. Our roadmap is to go to India and China and expand that roadmap, that coverage map of PSTN philosophy. For years, Microsoft said, 11's about as much as we can do because it's really hard to do PSTN worldwide. Since Zoom Phone has come exponentially grown, I'm guessing we're at 2 million, 3 million users now. I don't have the exact number in front of me. Since Zoom has come along and showcased the Zoom Phone architecture and our PSTN philosophy, Microsoft's actually taken over that as well. They've actually expanded to that. They actually announced 15 and then 20 and then 30 different countries that they're going to do coverage with. That's great. As we expand ours, they're going to expand theirs. 85% of the world still uses direct routing in the Zoom Phone and the Microsoft Teams Phone world. Do we have direct routing? Direct routing is bring your own carrier. That's all it really is. It's a good marketing gimmick for bring your own carrier. Now Microsoft came out with Operator Connect, and we came out with Partner Exchange. So that's where the world's going to, right? We're going away from on-prem infrastructure. We're going to the cloud, and we're going away from SBCs too. Will they always be a part of it? Yeah, probably for a long time. But companies want to get away from that hardware on-prem, and they want to go to a vendor that can provide partner exchange, or the ability for vendors and partners in the the PSTN world and the SIP world to take over that use case scenario of, hey, I don't want SBCs on my premises. I want you to have them. You maintain them. You support them. You admin them. I just want to buy dial tone. So we have calling plans. Microsoft have calling plans. They have direct routing. We have partner exchange. Sorry, we have bring your own carrier. They have Operator Connect. We have Partner Exchange. We're on the same in that regard from a PSTN philosophy platform, but our PSTN coverage is much larger here, and we're viewing to increase that as well. So I hope that was helpful. I'm 4 minutes late to my next meeting, and hopefully that answers some questions. If you have any questions beyond this video, please feel free to reach out to the Compete team or myself, and we can further elaborate on all this cool stuff. So enjoy.